Okay. Recording in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hi, everybody. I'm Laurie Handlers, and you're listening to another episode of Sex and Happiness, which I always say is a show about your sex and your happiness. But of course, it's also about mine and my guests and anyone you pass this along to. Lately, I've heard that people have been passing it along. Some of my listeners who were my students have been passing this along to their families, and I'm very excited about that. Thank you for the fan mail. Keep it coming. I love to hear from you about how the show is influencing you and affecting you. So today I have the pleasure of introducing one of my best friends in the whole world, somebody who I love and adore and who is like brilliant, but I'm going to give her the formal um, address here, and then we'll say hello. So her name is Elaine Yonge. She lives in London. She's a group facilitator, an educator, an energy and body worker in the fields of shamanism, tantra, and somatic sexology. For many years, she was a medical scientist and in surgery, working directly with patients. Her journey has involved lifelong fascination and inquiry into awareness, purpose, and the human connection. Love, sexuality, spiritual connection, soul wisdom, expansion, learning, unlearning. I love the unlearning part. Meditation, psychology, health, disease, exploring aliveness, sexuality, death, and grief. One of the most powerful medicines that she works with now is pleasure, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome to my show, Elaine Yonge.
Hi, Laurie. Thank you so much for that introduction. And sorry for all the tongue twisters that I have in my somatic sexology introductions.
Yeah,
It's beautiful to be back here. I can't think, maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago when we did the last talk together on your
yeah,
station. And since then, we've been in many, many adventures. And yeah, as a friend and as a colleague and someone who I admire and love, I'm so happy to be here.
thank you. Yeah, we've been to many countries together.
Mhm.
We've been on many adventures together, including almost being in a blizzard in Iceland at one point or other. Um, so we did last time you were on. We talked about self pleasure. We
Mm.
talked about so pleasure was in there, but
Yeah.
we talked about self pleasure. And today we're going to talk about a course that you teach. I'm so fascinated with it, and it's called Master Your Pleasure, Body Initiation. And so pleasure is a theme for you. Pleasure is really a theme for you. It's a major piece of the things that you deliver. And so let's talk about that a little bit. Like mean, why is it so important to you? And then why is it so important if you could separate the two?
Mm. Mm. Ah, I guess it's important to me because I learned through life before I started working with pleasure, but even more so when I started working with the body and sexuality, I learned how pleasure was not just a frivolous thing. I learned that pleasure was actually, on so many levels, as you said in the introduction, a huge healing modality in the sense of the physical body and all the chemicals that get released when we feel pleasure from our brain and our bodies get doused and all those, to our emotional body and how that helps us feel joy and loved and yeah, alive, right through to the energy body, which I like to work with, which is this part of us, that the aura that's beyond the skin, and
Yeah,
actually it also gets nourished massively by pleasure. And for some people, nowadays, often there can be this attachment to like pain and anger and sadness being noble and being the way to heal. And so it became very clear to me that as much as those things are important, in fact, one of the other things I work with really deeply is grief, and both are connected. The capacity for both are connected.
yes,
It became really important to me to see like, hey, this changed my whole being. This changed my whole experience and blew apart my beliefs about what pleasure was. For me, up until then, I guess pleasure was a small thing that happened maybe when you ate great food or you had great sex. That was the two things. And then I realized actually it's this huge expansion of multiple different types of experiences. So when I started to realize that myself, and also crucially, I think, to realize that even with a positive attitude and a good intention, accessing pleasure really deeply, fully is not that easy. There are many things that are in the way, and I started to discover that in myself. So it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
And as part of that, when I started working with individuals and groups, I realized that it's important for all the reasons that it was important to me, for the nurturing of the body, the physical body, the emotions, that actually it is a way of healing, and it's actually pretty tricky. It's still edgy for people. There's still a lot in the way. There's like layers and layers of physical body barriers, belief barriers, cultural barriers, fear of too
Traumatic
much, fear of
and
not
trauma
enough.
and
Yeah,
trauma barriers too, because of whatever may have happened to people.
absolutely.
I want to backtrack a second because if people heard the introduction to you, they heard that you had a background as a medical scientist and worked in surgeries. And so, like, I know the question comes up if they heard it, well, how come she left medicine to do workshops? I just want to do, I want to fill that blank in, Elaine, because I feel like if people have that question, they won't be able to fully let in the pleasure of what they're hearing from us. So can you give just a little bit to that? Like, I imagine it was a process, but how did that happen? Like, how did you go from this to this, which is, they're both very successful careers and you've had tremendous success in both. How come?
Mm. Well, I was working in a job that I loved. I was fascinated. I'm working in vascular surgery and working in diagnostics. And so it intrigued me. I love working with people. There was a beauty to getting people very vulnerable, holding them in space, sharing with them results, touching their bodies, looking inside their bodies. Um, and around 10, 12 years ago, I could sense that something in me was changing, in my life, in what I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure what. And then my young brother suddenly died, really dramatic suicide, and that plunged me into this place of, first of all, trying to hold it all together, but then this massive grief process. And actually, it was in this grief process when I went and did breath work and did study Tantra and felt the emotions for the first time that I realized that actually, although I'd had a great life, I made a good money, I had a private practice and worked in the NHS and had a lot of holidays and easeful life, that actually I was very disconnected from my heart, from my emotions. And although I was very interested in sexuality, it was quite disconnected and a little yeah, probably dysfunctional on some levels, I'm sure. So I began attending these events, and a few people said to me, "Hey, I can see you doing this," and I was like, "No, no, I'm have this nice life. I work 3 days a week. I do all the stuff. No." And then there was just no choice. It was like I took 6 months off, then I went back for a bit, then I took another 6 months off, and I was had all these ideas of how I would multi-manage doing both. And then I realized, like, my heart, my soul, everything about me wanted to be there, and I was actually a different person. Having gone through the grief process, I was a different person, and therefore to try and fit into the life that I'd had before, it just didn't work. Wouldn't have, well, it would have been a very unhappy, uncomfortable experience to stay there. And I was as surprised. Everyone told me I was clearly crazy, or you're giving up that to teach people how to breathe. You know, that was a classic. How are you going to eat? But I'm super glad I did it, and I've never regretted it for a moment.
So great.
Mm.
I'm pointing that out because I feel like people sometimes get in a rut, whether it's in a rut with relationship, whether it's a rut with job, whether it's a rut with their beliefs also. That I mean, that's a 180. That's a 180-degree turn that you made, and you don't have any regrets. You know, I did the same thing. I left corporate America and I took my first Tantra class and I went, this is it. I'm doing this. I don't know what it's going to take, but I'm going to do this. And I've never looked back either. So I want people to know that because I think sometimes change is so scary for people. And we're talking about mastering your pleasure. And sometimes to get to that pleasure, you have to make a big change, you know?
Absolutely. You're reminding me of one of my favorite things to listen to while I'm doing my daily exercise is Alan Watts. And, you know, he has so many amazing things to say. But one of the things he says is, and it's all set to music, so you can just, you know, vibe along with him, is when students come for advice about what to do with their life. You know, he said, and we talk, and I say, hey, what would you want to do if money was no object? And he said, eventually they'll get to something, you know, and I'll say, do that. He said, you know, why would you go to work to make money, to spend on the life that you don't want to be living so you can go on living, you know, to make money? So yeah, but I understand, you know, people's fears, particularly if they are, you know, financially secure and comfortable. It can feel like a really frightening thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think once you realize really strongly that this is your one life and your chance to lead it, then that takes over often.
Yeah. So good. So good. So why, so, okay, so we hit a little bit before about why it's tricky. Like when you said it was tricky, I thought of a fox or a coyote. You know, like pleasure is like a fox or a coyote. It's tricky. You know, people, there's so much in the way of it. So, you know, what are some of the, you know, the difficulties that human beings face when they're confronted, because it's somewhat confrontational with the idea that they could have more pleasure. They could actually, they're entitled to pleasure. I said pleasure is your birthright. So someone like me says pleasure is your birthright, and everybody goes, they stop breathing and they go,
Yeah.
so why is it so difficult? What is it? You know, how do we dissect this so that people can see that really it is their birthright, and they're worthy to go get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge piece, and the birthright thing is strong. And also, one of my teachers once said, you know, pleasure is medicine. So I think that's, you know, that's a beautiful thing for people to understand as a starting point. But actually, I don't like to make it about the medicine, because that's like telling them they've got to heal because there's something wrong with them again, you know? So when I began to examine this carefully, and when I created this week, I was looking at what is in the way and how can we go to those pieces in a way that's effective. And there's some very obvious things like many people cannot feel their body. So people often think that their body doesn't work, whether it's parts of their body or their genitals or their arousal, but actually often we just can't feel it for very many reasons: disconnection, history of trauma, just living in the head, not in the body. Very rarely is it something physical. There are some physical conditions that affect beings in their pleasure, but they're a small number. So first of all, you know, can you actually feel it? Number one.
Yeah.
And feeling it can be to do with the somatic system of the body and your capacity to feel it, and or feeling it could be allowing it into your awareness. So maybe actually the body feels it, but something in the mind comes and shuts it down, or something in the emotions comes to shut it down. And it's a process of learning to trust and surrender, trust your own body, trust those around you, clear out whatever the mind is shutting down because it's frightened of something. So, or the emotions are shutting down because it's frightened of something. So picking apart what are those things about, and letting go of any old emotions, changing and creating new beliefs that will allow people to feel. So that's just one very simple piece, but it's huge. And then there's the whole cultural thing, and of course you and I both work in different countries with people of many cultures, but there's the whole cultural piece where some religions tell us pleasure is shameful, you will go to hell,
Right, right.
all of that stuff, and pleasure is not godly. So if you're spiritual, then sexual pleasure is something that you should not be connected to. So there's this kind of big moral, ethical, cultural piece. And then there's the fact that actually we have what a great title somewhere that I read, where someone called something sanitizing eros, where actually, looking at pleasure and sexuality and erotic energy and, cleaning it up, sanitizing our sexual, and because it's not clean, it's not okay, it's not wholesome. So even in the media, in the places where it looks like they're promoting sexuality in the movies or they're using it in a way to sell, and they're not using it in a way to say, hey, this could be you. It's something separate. So this kind of massive sanitizing of eros, and also pathologizing of sex. So most of what we learn to do with sexuality as youngsters is, what diseases can I get? What, I mustn't get pregnant. So actually it becomes, something to be afraid of rather than
Yeah.
something to be
Ra-
open to.
Rather than something that you're so like you can't wait for, so
Yeah,
exciting. It
yeah.
should be this wonderful thing. Yeah. And then it's like, oop, well, that's scary. I'm not gonna do that. So yeah.
And one other piece which is really key for a lot of people I've noticed, the more and more people that I have worked with in this, is the fear of overwhelm. So much of the one of the sort of mental, emotional, psychosomatic pieces that gets in the way is that we fear we may get lost in pleasure. We may never find our way back. If we let ourselves go, we may never be able to stop. And I often say in workshops, don't worry, you're not going to be running around all day just like some crazy horny person, unable to function and do your accounts once you open the gates. But it is a real fear. Um,
And the nymphs.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
what
Yeah, and also this fear of like losing. So people sometimes, ironically want something so bad, but they think if I get it and I lose it, how will I ever live with the disappointment? So actually, they don't even,
yeah,
attempt to go
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Is another piece.
It's amazing to me. I wanted to, it's just amazing. I wanted to share with you. I don't know if I ever shared this, that I have a friend named Betty Louise who wrote a book called Pleasure as Medicine. And she has rheumatoid arthritis. And she was at a 10 level one day. I mean, she just was in so much pain. And she
Mm.
called an ex-lover of hers and asked him to come over and make love to her. She said, I don't want it to be like a slam bam. I want it to be like hours. Like, as long, how much time do you have today? Can you come over? Can we just connect? It's not like we're going to get back together, but I want to run an experiment with my body. And so he came
Wow.
over and he made love to her, and she went down to like a 4 or 5. Her like all the endorphins and everything that got freed in her
Mm.
body made the pain go down to 4 or 5, and she just went, that's it. Oh, it was all it was sparked because she was listening to Marvin Gaye's
Wow.
Sexual Healing, and she just said, I'm calling this person up. I have to experiment with my body.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can use that story if you want. I can also
Yeah.
introduce you to her, but she found that having a sexual encounter that
Mm.
lasted for, and that was primarily to produce pleasure in
Mm.
her body, made the pain levels go down in her body.
That's beautiful, and I will, with your permission, use that. And it reminds me of one of the things in the Master Your Pleasure Week that I don't know how many times a day I must say this during the week, many, many, is notice that there's always a choice as to where you turn your attention. So actually, sometimes pleasure can be there and a possibility, and we choose not. We choose something else. We choose to focus on our physical discomfort, or we choose to focus on the fact that we're annoyed or we're emotional about something. So notice there's a choice. Notice where you are choosing to focus your attention. And then one of my trainings is sexological bodywork. And one of the amazing tips that I learned then is actually how to take or how to support people and how to take like the smallest sensation of pleasure in one area and expand that with breath, with tension, with focus. So actually, for some people, pleasure is difficult to feel, but if you can just feel like one little bit of pleasure, and in Master Pleasure, we work with pleasures beyond sexual and sensual pleasures, like the whole range, which I'll share with you if you want. But it can sometimes be easier for people to ignite the pleasure body via some other thing like a mental or emotional pleasure,
Yeah.
which then can then they can then lead to more access to sexual sensual pleasure as a result.
Well, I know this because you know me so well. This may come as a surprise to you, but I can remember, like, I actually can remember in the 90s going skiing for a couple of days, buying a ticket, a ski pass ticket for like the whole day, taking a couple of really good runs in the morning, getting out on the slope, like maybe 10, 9:30, 10, going on the slope and having really sweet, wonderful run, go back up again, have another sweet, wonderful run, and something in my mind would then go, that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that. I don't know whose voice that was. I don't know where I got that one.
Yeah.
Like that's enough. And then I would say, I have to wrestle with myself and go, like when I caught it, I would
Mm-hmm.
wrestle with myself and go, wait a minute, you bought a whole day pass. You didn't buy a half a day pass. You wanted to go skiing all day. Take a break and then get back out on the slope as soon as you've had, hot chocolate or you've had a little bite to eat or whatever. Do not call it a day. And I had to, um, like, I really had to reckon with myself. Like, you, why? Who said that's enough?
Mm. Absolutely. It's this, there's a piece of, one of the big pieces that often comes up in groups around it is deservingness. Like, do I deserve? And it's often helpful, I think, to say, hey, if you were giving pleasure to someone else, whatever that pleasure may be, someone else you love, whether it's sensual or emotional, you know, the amount of time and energy you would give to that, would you give that to yourself? So there's a thing about deserving, and there's also this thing about overwhelm. This is the thing about
Yeah,
overwhelm, and actually, it's true for probably quite a lot of cases of early ejaculation in men when they would want to not ejaculate and they find it hard to keep engaging. One of the root causes underneath that for many people is this fear of overwhelm, like that's enough, I have to limit. So one of the ways that I'm working with pleasure, master pleasure, is how do you raise your pleasure ceiling? And so when we're working with things, it's like, okay, what would 5% more look like? What would 10%? Can you
true.
let in a little bit more, and can you raise that ceiling? So that's definitely there, but also the the way I picture them is like every time you have an experience and you open and your body holds pleasure, it opens and then maybe it closes back a little and then it opens and it closes. So this way of somatics, opening and closing, that's why I wanted to do 7 days, because my reckoning was if for 7 days all you do is go to the pleasure body in different ways, in different levels, with different kinds of pleasure, through different routes, these openings are more likely to stay more open. So many people can have amazing pleasure experiences. They've no idea how they achieve them and they never have them again in their life. And they feel there's nothing they can do about that. They feel like, oh, it just happened and it was so spontaneous. Whereas I want to show people that actually, once you start to understand what kind of pleasures you like and how they work for you, you can create those situations as often as you want in your life. But if you don't understand actually your pleasure body, if you haven't opened it, if you don't know what pleasures it likes and doesn't, it's like you're waiting your whole life for the magical formula to drop into your lap, you know,
Yeah.
and the rest of the time you're just going to be, experiencing no pleasure.
You could be waiting your whole life for that if you don't do something. Like so much, everybody has that argument about spontaneity. And I say poo poo to that because I think that what we're doing, what you're doing for sure, like the deliberate, deliberate exploring, deliberate experimentation, deliberate what you call raising the ceiling. I call it expanding the container. It's the same. Deliberate use of techniques and breathing and everything to expand so that you're not waiting your whole life. You're not like you're not wishing and hoping and singing and praying. Like you're
Yeah.
actually you're taking your life in your own hands because it is your life.
And you're not sort of sitting saying, well, once in 1981, on a great night, the universe decided I should have some pleasure and I had some, and that's it, the rest of my life. I'm just waiting.
Yeah,
And I say that, and I don't mean to mock and people, because actually, many people are taught that that's how life is, that actually it's not reasonable to expect something else. So yeah, definitely this place of expanding the capacity to hold it, which stops these mental, emotional lockdown belief system things coming into place. And it takes some practice. It takes some practice to trust your body. It takes some practice for the body to trust you, that you're going to listen to it.
yeah,
It takes understanding, what's your heart saying? What is your mind saying? What is your emotion saying? What is your sex saying? As we know from working with people in ISTA containers, like, what part of me is a yes and no? And so, because often people, in terms of sexual pleasure, haven't honored their boundaries, haven't asked for what they want, there's quite a lot of things to let go of and
yeah,
reclaim.
yeah. It definitely needs unpacking. Okay, let's talk specifically about it. Like, where
Mm.
you're giving your philosophy and you're describing it actually for people how they can, as they're listening, they can identify. Oh yeah, I'm somebody who limits my pleasure. Oh yeah, I had that time in 1981, but I haven't had that time since. Or, whatever. How we're describing it is good. Let's talk about the actual 7-day
Mm.
course that you have. First of all, given this crazy time of COVID-19 lockdown, do you think you'll be starting this up again? Are you, if you are, I know the last one you gave was in India, right at the time you were in Goa, right
Mm.
at the time when everybody was going to lockdown. So what's happening with the course now? What can people expect? And then we'll figure out then we'll tell them how they can find out more about it.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we were as the world was going into lockdown, we were in Master Your Pleasure, and many of us didn't realize that that was like a special time for reasons beyond what we understood then.
Yeah.
And the next date actually that I have is in the UK on the 28th of September. And interestingly, the last couple of days, I've been sitting with, do I intend to run it? If we can, do I let it go? And have taken the decision, because there's a lot of people who are feeling called to attempt to hold it, to see who's here. We had a lot of people coming from overseas to the UK, so we're trying to see who would want to come now. And if it's possible, we may run it in the UK on the 28th of September, but we need to check in with legalities and all
Sure.
the rest of it.
Sure.
I've been asked by a number of people, am I going to take it online? Because much of the work that people like you and I do has been taken online, and I am considering creating, would be an introductory or a 50% kind of the content as an online offering for the future, not just for people who don't want to do the full week, but for people who cannot get there, people who financial, time, location. So I can really see, having worked more recently deeply on festivals with online processes, I can see how that works. And I don't think I really believed or felt it was appropriate or safe or powerful for this kind of work. And I know differently now. So I feel like I may do that. So at the moment, that's in the planning, and I would intend, if the universe allows, to do 3 or 4 of them next year. Is my intention.
Excellent. I want to just share with you about that, the online experience. Om and I did Tantra Meets BDSM just 2 weeks ago online. It's the second time we did it online. And the feedback we got from people was they liked it better because they had more privacy. Like it was more intimate for them as a couple. We had only couples because you have to work with somebody. They said that they liked it because if they wanted to, they could just turn the screen off, do the exercises, and then come back when we called them back. And they basically said that they felt it was more intimate than when they were in the whole group with people around them for their intimate relating. So I'm telling you that because my mouth fell open when they said, oh no, it was really even more intimate. And I was like, wow, because we had the same doubts, and Michael and I also in Extraordinary Lovers. So I think that you'll find, there may be some parts you can't do, just like we had to find there were parts we couldn't do, but I think you'll find that, and you'll get people who would have never come out of the woodwork. They would just never, maybe they would never go to Goa or they would never, whatever, but all of a sudden they're showing up.
Yeah, and I, was so touched in the festivals and people online sharing how happy they are to get access to this and how amazing it is. So I think feeling into understanding that it feels safe, as safe as life can ever be, and appropriate and transmittable. Now that I know that, I think, yeah, I'm much more open to trying to create. It won't be exactly the same. Some things obviously we won't do, but a lot of the content is translatable. So some of the week is spent doing processes on your own, sometimes in groups of small 3 or 4, sometimes with one partner. But really it is master your pleasure. So it's actually, you're going there to figure out how to give pleasure to someone else. I keep joking that level 2 is going to be master of pleasure, but like, please, you need to come and understand your own pleasure first, because often people want to learn, how can I pleasure my partner? But actually, like everything else, it has to come back to the self and your own connection to yourself first and foremost. So we have a variety of, one thing I would like to say, when I was creating this, there's many options of things that I could have chosen to do from different lineages,
Yeah.
breathwork, tantra. But I came across this model that's like this 8-level model of pleasure based on human development. And it says that, the first pleasure we have is being in the womb and being held. Second pleasure is pain relief as a baby, discomfort relief. Then it goes on to laughter, games, and play, elemental pleasure. You've got mental, emotional, sensual, sexual, spiritual. And what I realized was actually that often the capacity to not drop into those more earlier pleasures, for example, the relaxing in the womb is about surrender. And the thing it gets in the way of a lot of people's pleasure is they cannot surrender. They're always on hypervigilance for whatever reason. One of the big pieces is the third level of like elemental games and play and laughter. People have lost the capacity to be playful, to be innocent. And that also has ramifications in our sensual, sexual connections.
So it does.
So the week kind of works through the model of going through these levels so people can see, because for some people, one level is a big block. For some people, they've got things going on in every level. For some people, it's just, a few tweaks. And so some people come who have like literally no experience or confidence in experiencing pleasure at all. And some people come who are like, pleasure veterans, but want to learn more ways to do things. So we're using breathwork journeys. We're using different types of sensate focus mapping, somatic techniques from sexological bodywork. We're using sometimes dance, bit of tango that Bernard brings in, so people can look at the games and play level. Work with like belly laughter. We work with sensuality, which a lot of people again are disconnected from the senses, and that affects their experience. And ultimately, we're looking at where is the access to the spiritual bliss channel that can arise, because when you asked me at the very beginning, why was a pleasure important to you and why is it important for others? Before I started speaking, the first thing that came to my mind was actually something different to what I said. And what came to my mind was we are amazing beings. We have these incredible bodies. We have this incredible energy capacity. We have this incredible spiritual, magic capacity. It's important because we have the capacity to experience it. So it's dreadful if we don't. It's dreadful if we spend the whole time walking around living this life and not having access to that.
I always tell people if we weren't meant to have pleasure, then we wouldn't have been born in skin. We would have been born in wood, metal, or glass, or something that's, like something that doesn't feel. This is like this amazing thing.
Yeah.
And it has access to everything that you just said. It's so, so amazing. All right, well, we're kind of out of time. So how can they find you? What's the best way to find out about Master Your Pleasure, whether it's live in person or whether it's live online with, however you decide to go, how should they access you?
So I'm not the most, technology, social platform savvy person, but the easiest way to find me is by my website, which is thetantricshaman.com. And you can, I'm sure, put that on your
Yeah, we will. We'll put that in the comments. Yeah.
and I do exist also on Instagram under Elaine Yonge, and I'm just in the process of finally thinking maybe I should do something on my YouTube channel, so I might be starting to put a few more recordings, videos and things on there.
That's
But
great.
I tend to put everything on my website, and if you join the mailing list on my website, then I always send out emails of new events, but I do not bombard people with emails because personally that drives me crazy. So
Yeah.
one a month, not every day or every week. But yeah, that's the best way to find me.
All right, that's wonderful. Well, I am so grateful that you decided to say yes and come on to my show again. And any chance to see you makes me happy. And I get a lot of pleasure. So thank you. And everybody, listen, I'm not kidding. You should check out Elaine. She's literally, I mean, we've worked together now, I don't know, 5 years. And she is my favorite person to work with. And just person to hang out with because we always have pleasure. We always laugh. We always have a wonderful time together. And so you should check this out. And I'm even thinking, wow, if you put it online, well, I didn't come to Goa, but maybe I'll do it online. So that's the motivation for you.
That's it. Better get it online.
That's great. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today to Sex and Happiness. Next time, I'm going to have another speaker who's going to be talking about mindfulness and pleasure, which is an interesting slant on it. And so I hope that you decide to tune in. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. And remember, this is about your sex and your happiness. This is Laurie Handlers signing off, saying namaste for sex and happiness.
Thank you.
Thank you.